Good morning, everybody. It is 10:02, so let's get started. I'm Aaron Fichtner, president of the New Jersey Council of County Colleges, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the very exciting first meeting of the Manufacturing and Supply Chain Management Collaborative. So thank you all for being here with us today to kick off this truly important work. It is great to see a large number of people from all over New Jersey who are here because we share a commitment to making sure that New Jersey has the most skilled and productive and innovative workforce that powers the manufacturing and supply chain management industries, which we know are so critical to our state's history, our current economic reality, and to our future. As many of you know, this is a partnership between the New Jersey Council of County Colleges, New Jersey's 18 community colleges, and the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. We are very thankful for the support that we have received from the legislature in the state budget and from the governor and his administration, and excited that all of you are joining with us in this important work. To kick us off, I'd like to introduce my friend and our partner in this important work, Chrissy Butius from the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. Good morning, Chrissy. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good morning, Aaron. It's such a pleasure to see you again. And thank you for everyone joining us here on this Friday morning. Again, I'm Chrissy Butius, Chief Government Affairs Officer at NJBIA. You know, manufacturing is near and dear to NJBIA's heart. Founded over 100 years ago by our state's manufacturers, it runs in our blood, and we're really happy to see so many of you here today to talk about what the critical issues are with respect to workforce in the manufacturing and logistics sector. You know, when I came to BIA, the number one thing I heard, and this certainly includes from our manufacturers, is we need to make sure that we have a qualified workforce moving forward. And how are we going to make sure that they have the skills necessary to move us into the future with all this ever-changing technology? And so our role has been to ensure that New Jersey has been as responsive as possible to the needs of our New Jersey manufacturers and educating our policymakers. Again, with our educational partners here, as well as our government partners, our labor partners, and our association partners, we look forward to having a conversation about what those skill sets and career ladder opportunities are for the future workforce in our manufacturing and logistics centers. In fact, my colleague, Chris Emmerholz, has worked very closely with the New Jersey Manufacturing Caucus, who actually just had one of their forums yesterday, and certainly workforce was a key component of that. We look forward to also having formed a partnership with New Jersey's Manufacturing Extension Program, John Kennedy and his entire team, so that we are all collaborating on this really, really critical sector for New Jersey. And so, Aaron, as you frequently hear me say, you know, the business community appreciates the opportunity to be at the table with our educational partners and all those I just listed earlier. And my colleagues, Chris Emmerholz, Kyle Sullender, who you'll hear from in a moment, will go over the labor market data, are all here to work as collaboratively as possible with you. And I just encourage everyone on the line here today to please lend your feedback, to please be as involved and informative as you can be. Your input is going to be so valuable to us creating those career paths moving forward. So happy Friday, everyone, and look forward to a really robust conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you so much for being with us and for all of your support and all of your colleagues at NJBIA. Thank you so much, and appreciate all of that. So as Chrissy said, the goal of this Pathways to Career Opportunities initiative is really to make sure that we do have the most productive and skilled and innovative and entrepreneurial workforce to power our state's key industries. And today we're here to talk about manufacturing and supply chain management. And so that is our goal, and it is to expand pathways that open up opportunities in a more equitable and inclusive way to make sure that all New Jerseyans have an opportunity to be part of that incredible workforce that drives these two very intertwined industries. So the purpose of these collaboratives, the key deliverable for this year is the development of a strategic workforce plan that we hope will guide all of our work, will guide state investments, and will guide partnerships to, again, make sure that we are meeting those important goals. And so we will be meeting on a monthly basis, partially virtually and partially in person. We're hopeful that we'll be able to have some in-person gatherings so that we can really encourage and foster networking and collaboration. But we look forward to seeing all of you on a monthly basis to be part of this really vital and vibrant conversation. The collaboratives really have two intertwined missions. The first is to really shed light on the changing workforce needs of this industry, to better understand industry trends and labor market information, to make sure that all the work that we do collectively and individually is driven by the needs of the economy, the needs of employers, the needs of labor unions and others in this space. To do that, we have to also make sure that we're building this ecosystem. We are leading this effort and proud to be leading this effort at the community colleges with NJBIA, but we know that the solution ultimately to the goals that we are trying to achieve really involve stronger relationships between high schools and community colleges and four-year colleges, community-based organizations, training providers, other partners, labor unions. This really has to be a big tent ecosystem. And so we are excited when I see all of the great folks that are with us today and all of the amazing diverse organizations and institutions that you represent. I do believe that we have a moment that we can seize with this initiative to make sure that we are reclaiming our place in the country and the world as really the center of the most skilled workforce in the country and in the world. All of this work is going to be guided by an industry leadership team. And so we are working with NJBIA to identify top-level industry leaders that will meet quarterly to guide this entire effort. And we look forward in future collaborative meetings to sharing some of their insights with all of you in future discussions. The other corollary to this entire collaborative effort is the establishment of two centers of workforce innovation, one in manufacturing and the other in supply chain management. They are being led by community colleges who are in a planning process now, and they will be bringing in high school and four-year partners and training provider partners to be doing that important work. Those two centers of workforce innovation will be receiving resources to be able to develop new curriculum models, new partnership models, prior learning assessments, all sorts of different things that will really advance our effort to build a skilled workforce. And to share that information, those curriculum models, those partnership models widely across the state so that we are rising together to make sure that we are meeting this challenge and making sure that all New Jerseyans have a pathway to a good paying job in this vibrant intertwined industry of manufacturing and supply chain management. So thank you all for joining in this journey with us and to thinking differently about how we all work together. And with that, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Catherine Stargell, who is the Senior Director on our team leading our Pathways Initiative. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning, Aaron, and good morning to all of you all. Certainly, we are very appreciative that you are spending your Friday morning with us for our inaugural Manufacturing and Supply Chain Management Collaborative meeting. So thank you. So as Aaron has mentioned, we are partnering with a lot of different industry and education partners. And today, our program will include some of those partners. Our next segment is the labor market landscape. And we will have with us presenting that information, Kyle Sullender, who is the Executive Director of Focus NJ. Focus NJ is the nonprofit research arm or organization created under the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. He will do the presentation, and Jason Timian, the Chief of Labor Market Information at the New Jersey Department of Labor and Workforce Development, will join Kyle to answer your questions after Kyle's presentation. So please be sure to enter your questions in the chat box, and we will get to hopefully all of them, but certainly as many as we can. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Jason, for being premier partners with us in this initiative, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine, and good morning to everybody. Good morning, Jason, as you share the screen with me here. As Catherine noted, my name is Kyle Sullender. I'm the Executive Director of Focus New Jersey. We are an independent research nonprofit conducting nonpartisan economic and workforce research to support sound public policy in New Jersey. I want to start by just apologizing to the folks on the call who have joined us for multiple of the collaboratives this week. You've had to hear more from me this week than I think my own wife has. So hopefully I can make it up to you by not seeing you for the next month or so until the next collaborative meeting. But obviously I'm kidding. We are extremely excited to be partnering with NJCCC for this important work. And I'd like to start by thanking my colleagues at the Department of Labor and Workforce Development for helping to put this presentation together and also working with us so collaboratively today to bring this information to you. For the next 20 or so minutes, I'll be providing an overview of two sectors, mainly the manufacturing sector, and then we'll also jump into the transportation, distribution, and logistics sector with its important role to play in supply chain management. This overview will include a number of things. It'll include an examination of the size of the sector and its various components. We'll take a look at the individual jobs and occupations that drive the sector. We'll also be getting an idea for the demographic makeup of the individual workers who fill this workforce. And we'll look at some other top-level insights as well. Obviously, all with the goal of informing the members of this collaborative as you move on to then begin development of career pathway maps that will help students and lifelong learners develop successful and sustainable careers for many years to come. A few final notes before we get started. These presentations have been designed to work with multiple audiences and in front of multiple formats. And so you may notice me skipping a few extra slides here and there as we try to keep to the information most relevant for the folks on this call and also stick within the time that we have allotted today. Also, as we get to a number of slides, you'll notice that there may be information that I can't cover again in the time that we have allotted. I'll be moving on faster than I can address everything. I should note that these slides are publicly available at the Department of Labor's website. And if we haven't already shared that link in the chat, I'm sure that we can do so for anybody who wants to spend a little more time digging into the information. With that being said, we can begin with the manufacturing sector as soon as I share my screen. So let's get started with the manufacturing sector, and we'll take a look at some high-level insights before we dive a little bit deeper. So we can start here by taking a look at the manufacturing. I'm sorry, I skipped too far ahead. Some high-level insights into the industry. So we'll begin by looking at the GDP output. So the manufacturing industry cluster, as we call it, contributed approximately $54 billion to the GDP in New Jersey in 2020. That equates to about 10% of all output in the state. We'll talk about the individual segments of the industry as we move forward, but we'll note at the onset that the chemical manufacturing segment is the largest within the manufacturing sector. It's also the largest, one of the largest chemical manufacturing segments in the country. In terms of total employment, it ranks fifth behind just Texas, California, Illinois, and Ohio. So New Jersey's place among chemical manufacturing in the United States is very, very high. One trend that'll be mentioned repeatedly throughout the presentation is New Jersey's locational advantage and the benefits that it offers to consumers and the transportation industry, making New Jersey such an attractive location for this work, given our proximity to so much of the major urban hubs and hubs of economic activity in the country, obviously with New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., all within very short driving distance. We'll dive a little deeper into specific occupations and occupational wages as we move through the presentation, but we should note at the onset that wages in the manufacturing sector do tend to be a little bit higher than the statewide average in the private sector of about $74,000. Now, some notes about the ups and downs of the industry as we look forward. You'll note on the graph to the right side of your screen here, the dark blue dotted line that represents the US's manufacturing GDP as a whole. Beneath that, you'll see a dotted orange line representing New Jersey's manufacturing segment as a whole. Now, if you find the area on this chart corresponding with the late 2000s, you'll see a dip on both lines respectively, right around the time of that Great Recession from 2007 to 2009. And we'll see that really steep effect that the Great Recession had on manufacturing, both nationally and here at the state level. That being said, if you begin to look at the recovery following it, obviously in New Jersey, if we look at that orange line, the recovery was a bit delayed. It seems like the country's manufacturing segment as a whole recovered a slightly bit more quickly. But in the 6 years leading up to 2020, the manufacturing sector in New Jersey had actually added jobs in each of those 6 years. And you can see a steady rebound in the GDP output in that period. Now we hit that 2020 period, however, when we reached that $54 billion in GDP that we mentioned a moment ago. And we also have the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now here you'll note the various components of the sector. And we mentioned chemical manufacturing a moment ago. And these are these areas that drive that GDP. And that's what we're looking at here. So this is the various components of the manufacturing sector broken out by the share of GDP that they contribute to the sector as a whole. Now, as we noted a moment ago, chemical manufacturing is the largest and does account for the most GDP in the sector in New Jersey. However, you'll note if you look at that graph to the left side of your screen that the dominance of that segment of the industry has actually waned a bit in recent years. In 1990, it accounted for 51% of all manufacturing GDP in New Jersey, but in 2020, that share had fallen to about 34%. And just looking at the GDP figures, we'll start to see why, because there's a couple of fast growing segments within the manufacturing industry that have taken up a greater share than they used to when chemical manufacturing made up that greater proportion. The most significant of them is computer and electronic product manufacturing. This has been the fastest growing sub-industry within manufacturing, increasing its GDP from approximately $464 million in 1997 to $6.1 billion in 2020. We also will note, just looking through this chart here, that computer and electronics manufacturing segment now accounts for the third largest GDP segment of the industry, whereas if we look back at the beginning of the graph in 1997, you can barely even see the industry really getting to the explosive rise of this segment. Medical device manufacturing also accounts for a large amount of growth, nearly doubling its output since the year 2000. Now, having acknowledged the decrease in GDP output since the Great Recession, it probably won't be a surprise to see that jobs in the manufacturing industry have also experienced a bit of a loss since before that period. If we index them to 1990, we'll see the manufacturing segment in New Jersey losing about 291,000 jobs over that 30-year period. In New Jersey, this represents about a 2.6% annual decline. U.S. manufacturing as a whole, however, has declined at an annual pace of about 1.2%. So this is a national trend, the decrease in reliance on manufacturing, the decrease in the U.S.'s manufacturing power in terms of employment and GDP. However, we are seeing New Jersey's loss there a little bit steeper. And so again, although it is a national trend, we do see New Jersey's impact being a little bit more significant. That being said, as I noted a moment ago, New Jersey had added manufacturing jobs for 6 consecutive years prior to that slight downturn amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And so if we look at that the orange solid line on the left side of your screen, those job gains over 6 years are clearly modest. That line looks almost flat, but is trending upward slightly before that slight downtick into 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic. So with all of that being said, we can talk a little bit more about the sub-industries within manufacturing that drive this growth and where they're congregated within the state. And so we'll start by looking at the total employment in manufacturing split up amidst the various counties in New Jersey. You'll note here that employment in manufacturing tends to be highly concentrated in New Jersey's most populous counties, as well as along the I-95 corridor. As mentioned before, this is because New Jersey offers businesses its extensive transportation network to carry goods to the more than 100 million potential customers in very close proximity to the state. Now, that being said, interestingly, we can tell a different story if we move away from looking at total employment and instead look at the proportion of manufacturing employment to the total number of people employed in a county. And so I'll switch to this map, which again, if we just compare the color shading, as I jump back and forth, we see some darker regions, some lighter regions, and we almost see the opposite as we then flip to this proportional map. And so here, again, what we're looking at is the reliance on manufacturing. So take Cumberland County, for example. This is the largest share of manufacturing employment with compared to total private sector employment in the county. Manufacturing makes up roughly 18% of all employment in the county. If we flip back again, Cumberland County was a modestly shaded area with about 8,000 jobs, but here we see the real reliance on that sector in Cumberland County. And we see that in some other places as well, Passaic and Warren being deeply shaded, Gloucester, Salem, some southern county regions. And so here we see some of the sparsest populated areas in the state relying more heavily on the manufacturing sector, even if that sector represents fewer total jobs than it does in some of our higher populated areas. We also note on this chart that the lower that we along our coastal counties, we'll see some lower proportions of manufacturing reliance, our Monmouth, our Ocean, and our Atlantic counties. Now, with that, we can switch focus and look at some of the individual jobs and occupational groups that drive the industry. You'll find that nearly 80% of all manufacturing jobs are classified into these 5 groups. Production being the largest, this represents nearly half of all workers that are directly involved within the manufacturing segment. They are directly involved in the production subcategory. Then we see some other groups in decreasing order. We see our transportation and material moving segment, our office and administrative segment. This is straightforward. Management, architecture, and engineering. Then we see this other robust category. This is our 23% categorized as other, and this is primarily our business, sales, and other professional and service occupations within the sector. We can get a little bit more specific, though. We can start to talk about specific occupations that drive the manufacturing sector and where these individuals within the workforce find themselves. Now, a couple interesting things, and what you have in front of you now is the 20 most common occupations within the manufacturing sector. And I won't go through and read them all and read off this chart to you. That, of course, wouldn't be a productive use of our time. What I'll do is highlight a couple of things that stand out to me when I take a look at this right away. One of the first was that these top 20 occupations only account for about 41% of the total industry. That may seem about right, but it does stand in comparison to some of the other fields that we've looked at this week in these collaborative meetings, where typically the top occupations make up about 2/3 of the industry. And that makes sense when we look down that share of industry column, and we'll see that even the most common occupation within manufacturing only represents about 4% of total employment within the industry. Now, again, this isn't to say that these jobs aren't important, that they're not good jobs, that they're not important to the industry. It's just an interesting comparison when we compare it to something like healthcare services, where the most common occupation being registered nurses accounts for something like 15% of the industry. And so we see a much tighter correlation between that top occupation. Within manufacturing, we have 96,000 employees within these top 20 occupations, and they tend to be very spread out. Some other interesting notes as we look through, just 3 of the top 20 most common occupations require an education beyond high school. Now, I'll note that these educational requirements as they're listed tend to be the rule and not the exception. We know that there are exceptions to these. There's often businesses and companies that offer entry points into some of these occupations, maybe without an educational requirement, even where across the industry we would typically see one. But those, again, those are the exception. What we have listed here tend to be the broader rule as it occurs throughout the industry. Otherwise, the remaining 17 entries require either no formal educational credential or a high school diploma or equivalent, again, for entry. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, because given that these are only the top 20 occupations, we can look a little bit more at all occupations and the educational requirements for them, because I think this is obviously going to be extremely important to the folks on this collaborative as we plan career pathway maps for individuals to find successful careers within the manufacturing field. Here you'll note again that roughly 71% of all occupations within the industry fall into this low requirement area. And so this is our high school diploma or equivalent, or our no formal educational credential. Another interesting thing, and there's a couple of interesting things contained within this slide once again, there is this 1/5 of the industry that is in this high requirement segment. And so we almost bypass the moderate requirement segment for a moment and see this 20% of the industry requiring at least a bachelor's degree. And these are generally classified as our scientists and our engineers. So they're almost a category unto themselves within the industry. Another note, as listed out on this slide, although the majority of employment in manufacturing may not require post-secondary education to enter the position, many of the tradespeople and production workers that comprise this group often have many years of experience. They may have completed a registered apprenticeship or have completed extensive on-the-job training programs. And so those educational requirements, again, these are the guidelines of entering the workforce. But in terms of advancing and finding success long-term within the industry, it's important to note how many of these workers are completing those additional credentials in collaboration with their educational requirements as we typically think about them. Now, finally, before we switch over to transportation, distribution, and logistics, we'll take a look at the demographic makeup of the industry. And I'll have to skip a number of slides to get there, so excuse me. We'll start with the age of workers within this segment of the industry, or I'm sorry, within this industry. Data shows a steady and gradual change within manufacturing towards an older workforce in nearly every age cohort. Workforce age 65 and older has nearly tripled its share of employment over the past 20 years, going from 3% to almost 9%. We also see the workforce aged 55 to 64 being the fastest growing cohort. And so as we look at that color-coded chart to the right side of the screen, you can see that 55 and 65 and over segment increasing in its size as we move from 2000 to 2020. The period, or the group that has declined the most over this period, happens to also be those 35 to 44-year-olds. And so manufacturing is experiencing this aging of the workforce, which is a concern in a number of industries nationally, and not just within New Jersey, as we talk about the aging of the baby boom generation reaching retirement and how that impacts different industries. In terms of other characteristics, we'll move very quickly here just to note that the segment is largely male, outnumbering women about 63 to 37%. It's not as significant as some other industries in the state, but it is a more male-dominated industry than we see statewide as a whole, where things are more closely divided, about 50-50. Racially, the sector is actually pretty representative of the population as a whole, or of the workforce as a whole. We see white workers making up about 65% versus 68% of the statewide workforce. Black and African American workers make up about 11% versus 13% of the statewide workforce. And I won't read these through to you, but you can see actual general parity with regards to representation. The same is true if we look at the Hispanic population, which is slightly more represented in the manufacturing industry at about 25% versus 21%. With that, I'm going to switch gears for a second. I'm going to see if I haven't had to switch screen shares mid-presentation previously, so hopefully now I can just switch over to our transportation, distribution, and logistics segment. So with the time we have left, before we move on to questions, I'd like to switch gears and take a brief look at the TDL industry, which is a lot easier for me to say than transportation, distribution, logistics, which plays a critical role in terms of supply chain management in the state. Briefly here, we can see where the growth has occurred most in the past decade within this segment of the industry. You'll see that really long bar at the top of the left-hand side of your screen within warehousing and storage, a subcomponent of the industry, which has just exploded over the past 10 years, adding 43,200 jobs. And this is really being fueled by the growing e-commerce market, which has intensified the need for these workers. You can go through and look at some of the other, but comparatively much more modest growth in certain areas. But at the bottom of your screen, you'll then see that large decrease in the electronic markets and agents and brokers area, which lost about 14,000 jobs in just the last 10 years. And that actually, that 14,000 number, it's hard to tell if that's a lot or a little on its own. That's about 54% of all jobs within that segment on its own, lost within the last 10 years. So a major deceleration within that individual component of this industry. Now, to be clear, one reason why we're going to be focusing more on the distribution and logistics segment today is because we are limited on time and because it is extremely pertinent. They're all also interrelated, but also because it makes up the vast majority of the TDL cluster. As you'll see here in 2020, roughly 75% of all employment within this TDL cluster was within the distribution segment. As we look forward, we'll start to look at some of the individual occupations, as I did a moment ago with manufacturing. Now, as we noted previously, we can see the significance and the importance of the state's major highway systems to the TDL cluster, just as we noted with the manufacturing cluster. Looking at the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see this really informative layered map where we have the total employment geographically dispersed throughout the state, but we also have these dots and these green lines. So just working through this very quickly, obviously the darker shaded areas of the map represent where there's more employment in the TDL cluster. What's fascinating to me is that there's certain segments of the map you can't even tell how dark or light they're shaded because they are absolutely covered by these red and yellow dots. You probably can't tell that some of them are yellow, but these red and yellow dots that represent establishments within the TDL cluster. And you can see just how tightly packed they are to the major urban areas of the state, right outside of our cross-border neighbors like New York City and Philadelphia, and then also, excuse me, right along those major highway infrastructure areas in the state. So we can see again the importance of that as we look at the geographic distribution of these jobs, that highway system playing such a critical role. And we can start to talk about the major occupational groups with the few minutes that we have left here before we turn things over to questions. The transportation and material moving occupational group accounted for the greatest proportion of jobs in the industry, contributing roughly half of all jobs in the TDL industry. So a moment ago, we noted how the distribution area of the TDL cluster represented about 75% of all jobs, but the transportation and material moving occupational cluster on its own represents about 50% of that cluster. Almost 2/3 of these workers were also employed within warehousing and storage, truck and transportation, couriers, and merchant industries. And so we see even within here the breakup of how tightly correlated some of the TDL jobs are. As we move on to talk about specific jobs, we'll once again just note the tight correlation of some of these occupational groups. Again, over 2/3 of all of these, over 1/3 of these occupations being within kind of these 4 occupational clusters. And then again, we have that 62% area. We'll run through the top jobs very briefly here so that we can, again, get on to questions. I know we are limited on time and we had a lot of ground to cover this morning. Hopefully I haven't bored anybody yet. Working through these top jobs, we see those laborers, freight, stock, material movers by hand. And here we see, as I noted with the manufacturing segment, we were really broadly dispersed, the top occupations making up only about 4% of the total industry. Here we see that top occupation, again, representing 14% of the entire industry. As we move down to the second most common occupation within the field, heavy and tractor trailer truck drivers make up another 9%. Packers and packagers make up another 9%. And so we see a little tighter of a correlation between these top occupations and their place relative to the total industry. With regards to potential overall earnings potential, you can see some of the salaries listed here, but we can also look at the breakdown industry-wide. The vast majority of New Jersey's TDL workers earn a salary somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, but we also see some segments that are able to exceed that a little bit. We see a 15 or a small segment that makes in that under $29,000 a year category. Again, we see that larger portion making the 30 to 50, and then some others as well. With the final few moments, I want to jump, just as we did with manufacturing, to talk about some of the demographic characteristics of the industry. Here we'll see the educational breakdown of these occupations, where more than 40% of the occupations within the cluster requiring no further education beyond high school, although just as within manufacturing, many of the occupations within the TDL cluster do require further licensing requirements. And so again, the educational requirement sector, breaking it into those low, moderate, high, may not map as closely onto this sector as it does to some others because of those outside licensing requirements. Like construction, we tend to see that the TDL industry as a whole is getting slightly older. It is slightly older than the state's workforce as a whole. We look at those purple bars as we move across your screen, the 35 to 44 demographic, the 45 to 54 demographic, and that 55 to 64 demographic, all being overrepresented as opposed to the state's workforce as a whole. Like construction as well, the TDL industry tends to be more male than New Jersey's workforce in totality. And in terms of race, again, we do see a more diverse representation than the New Jersey workforce as a whole. It tends to be slightly less white than New Jersey's workforce. It tends to overrepresent Black and African American workers a little bit more. And there's some other categories as we get to the end there, some other races, two or more races that are a little more represented. So that is a lot of information. I apologize. I think I took a little more time today than I have in previous segments, wanting to make sure that we were able to cover so much of this ground that I'm sure that I rushed through, especially the end, so that I could be conscious of time and get to some of your questions. But with that, I want to thank you for your attention. I want to welcome Jason back onto the screen, and I'll turn things over to our moderator to take some of your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle, and good morning, everyone. I'm Glenn Best, Director of Manufacturing and Supply Chain Sector Strategies and Workforce Partnerships, along with my colleague, John Miller, Program Manager. This was a very informative segment of the program, Kyle. We appreciate that real-time data that will help inform our workforce centers around developing strategic plans that will help address our current shortages and talent pipelines. And we thank Jason for joining us as well. And now I'd like to offer a few of the questions. We had quite a few questions from our attendees around some of the information presented. One question, does the chemical data include pharmaceuticals, or is that a separate data set regarding the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, the pharmaceutical industry is a subset of the chemical as a whole, yeah. There's also other segments within that chemical that would include like flavors and fragrances, perfumes and toiletry preparation chemicals. So that chemical manufacturing does include quite a bit more than just pharmaceuticals, but yes, it is a part of it.
Great, thank you. Another question, did the manufacturing and supply chain industries experience a similar effect from the Great Resignation as other industries?
Jason, I'm happy to tackle this one a little bit. I don't have specific data at the moment with regards to industries in New Jersey. I don't believe BLS has released industry-specific resignation data at the state level. And so I'm not familiar with the national data at the moment. What I can say is BLS does release regional estimates of what they call quit rates. This is the number of people who quit their jobs within a month relative to the proportion of the state's total employment. The Northeast region as a whole has seen a slightly smaller impact from the quote unquote Great Resignation than other areas of the country. To be clear, it certainly exists. There's certainly an increase in those quit rates and the turnover within the Northeastern region. It's just not as pronounced as some other areas of the country, like the South and the Midwest.
Yeah, Kyle's absolutely right. The data set he's referring to is called the JOLTS, or Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. And anybody watching the news over the past couple of months has seen, we have 10 million open jobs and nobody to fill them. That's where that data comes from. It's called JOLTS.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. And a follow-up question along the same lines. Have you seen a reshoring of manufacturing jobs due to supply chain disruption during the pandemic?
I don't know that there's been any evidence of that yet in the data that I've seen, at least.
Yeah, it's a quick. No, I agree with you, Jason. I couldn't answer one way or another. It's a fast turnaround. This data tends to be a little more delayed.
Yeah.
We know that there's a dollar value attributed to manufacturing output in Cumberland County. Is there a dollar value example compared to other counties such as Bergen County and Cumberland County?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head for the counties, but they are available at the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, and I'd be happy to look that up.
Wonderful, thank you. We had another question in the chat. How does automation play into the projections for TDL occupations? Is there any data available on how new technology might impact jobs?
So technology is a tricky thing to project, especially 10 years out. It's a bit dated now. I lost, hold on. There we go. It's a bit dated now, but I do actually develop the industry and occupational projections for the Department of Labor. I used to use the reference, if you told me 10 years ago, I'd have a computer in my pocket, but that reference is kind of dated now. So I've been doing this way too long. In terms of gauging automation and where it'll be 10 years from now and how that's going to affect jobs, the USBLS does attempt to forecast how much movement within an industry and occupation is going to be prominent. So for instance, a forklift driver is in high demand right now, but if we automate all those with robots at some point in the future, that occupation may lose demand. They do take that into account, but as far as using a crystal ball to tell exactly when that's going to happen, that's difficult.
Yeah, and Jason, I'll just add, Focus New Jersey has previously done a study on the future of work, breaking it out by industry, and in the transportation, distribution, logistics area, there is a note within that study regarding how automation and the implementation of new technologies, such as robotics, new automation software and hardware, will allow for increased productivity. And what we know is we look at these trends throughout industries, because obviously the implementation of artificial intelligence and new technologies isn't limited to any one industry. The general trend often tends to be, or the expectation often tends to be, that the jobs that are lost as a result of that automation will be replaced, and then replaced in excess by new jobs to then manage these data analytics and these artificial intelligence. What the question always is what do those jobs look like compared to the jobs that they're replacing? Obviously, replacing somebody who's operating a forklift or a truck is not a one-to-one replacement with somebody who's now doing data analytics back in the office. So hopefully that answers that question a little bit.
It sheds quite a bit of light around the transition from more the manual type of employee to a more technically proficient type of employee, not necessarily replacing the individual, but reskilling.
Right.
In the new. Another question, does employment shown in the industry buildings include those contract workers employed by employment agencies, as well as part-time and seasonal workers?
It does not. So the occupational data that you saw today, it comes from a survey that's offered biannually. And we ask a number of employers as of May 12th and November 12th, what are your employment levels? What types of workers are you hiring? And how much are they being paid? So seasonal workers wouldn't be accounted in with that. We tend to rely more on what we read in the news. Amazon's planning to hire 20,000 people for the Christmas break, but that's not captured in the data.
Thank you. Another question was, are there any examples of organizations that make up the medical device sector of manufacturing? That may be more a question for you, Kyle or Jason.
Do you mean like a list of employers within that industry? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's what the question.
Sure. Yeah, we have that available on our website. Again, I don't have it offhand right now, but it's anyone looking it up. The NAICS industry code for it is 3391, and any industry or any employer with that code would be part of that sector.
Thank you, Jason. Wonderful. So at this time, I think we have one more question. I will give that person. There are two types of automation: automation that replace jobs and automations that change the nature of jobs. I think this is more of a statement. Okay. All right.
Well, it's a correct statement, Glenn, for sure. And I think, again, that underscores the importance of reskilling and upskilling and the opportunities for those kinds of educational opportunities throughout the state.
Yeah, I mean, just my opinion, I think in the not too distant past, there was a fear like, oh my gosh, the robots are coming. What are we all going to do for work? But I don't think that's the case. That's not going to how it's going to play out. We're going to have different types of occupations, different types of sectors to maintain that automation and AI.
And that gets to, we've seen in surveys, both locally here that we've run, and also if you look at some of the national and international ones about how this changes the needs of employers and what employers are looking for. Those rapid changes in the kinds of work and the kinds of work that you're being expected to do is increase the reliance of employers on what we call essential skills. This is flexibility, adaptability, problem solving. And so those are becoming increasingly important as well, your ability to take on those new tasks that previously may not have been part of your role or may not have been as important of a part of your role. It's increasingly important for employees to be able to make those adaptations. And that's what employers are increasingly saying they're looking for.
And to that issue, what does the data represent as it relates to opportunity laws for persons that are aging out of the workforce? Is there any data around that as it relates to both supply chain as well as the manufacturing sector?
I think the charts that for both industries that Kyle showed shows an obvious aging in those older cohorts, 45, 55, 55, 65, and 65 plus. The younger cohorts behind them, we've been working for years to get middle school and high school kids excited about manufacturing. Manufacturing is not working on the dirty floor anymore. It's oftentimes a high tech laboratory. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to get them excited about making things, not necessarily with their hands, but with their minds and with computers. And it's a matter of getting them excited and training that workforce.
Wonderful. I think that all of our industry partners represented would agree that that's exactly the approach that they would like to see happen. And our Pathways Initiative obviously has taken that stance that that's an important component to really expanding the pipeline of talent for this generation of workforce that's coming through. So I'd like to thank Jason and Kyle once again for this in-depth insight around both the supply chain sector and the manufacturing sector. They have been soldiers with us this week and joining us each day for our collaborative sessions. And so thank you both again for taking time and providing us with some insight. Now I'd like to transition to our spotlight section and introduce each collaborative meeting. We plan to spotlight one of our schools and a partner representing a successful partnership that they have. And this month, we're going to be sharing information with you about Raritan Valley's partnership. With that, I'd like to introduce our participants today. We have Conrad McCurris from Raritan Valley Community College. He's the coordinator of advanced manufacturing and technology. He will be joined by Fred Carden, director of engineering for Triad Tool, and George Romanella, production manager for Triad Tool. Thank you all for joining us today. Conrad.
Thank you for having us. Good morning, everyone, and very informative. Thank you, Jason, and for the information on the industry, especially manufacturing. I was locked into that, and that was so awesome. Now I know where to go for some information when we're looking for it. So thanks. I'm introducing Triad Tools, who have been with us for several years in our what I call our we're still babies when we grow up. I would love that they're still with us as partners, because they've done so much for our efforts in pathways for our students and their futures. As Glenn said, Fred Carden and George Romanella. Fred is the director of engineering for Triad, and George is the production manager. And they have employed 6 of our graduates from RVCC, and those 6 graduates came from one cohort. And I won't steal their thunder because they'll speak about those employees. And those candidates are now registered apprentices with their organization, and they have all completed their RTI already, related technical instruction, and they've earned 10 or more NIMS level 1 machine credentials. And that is just an outstanding job within itself. NIMS has a certificate for outstanding achievement, and at least one of these graduates have that certificate for outstanding achievement. So I say this to say that they got the best of the best, and I would love for them to express their experience with the program so far. And then I'll just come back at the end just to talk about the actual multiple on and off ramps. So Fred and George, go right ahead to speak.
This is Triad Tool. We're approximately a 50-man shop that's basically focusing in commercial, aerospace, and military application components. We're AS 9100 certified. And of course, because of our expansion over the years, we have needed to hire more employees. And it's always good to get somebody in that has a foundation similar to a apprenticeship program, which now it is an apprenticeship program. We recognize that because I, in my early days back in 1980, started my apprenticeship. I served my 4 years working through a couple, we'll say, higher end tool and die shops, molding shops, learn my field. So recognizing the program that RVCC had adapted, and then working with them, we decided to join the board there in order to help along the candidates and future candidates and the program so that we can ensure that the trade lives on. The trade has given so much to us that this is a give back type event for us. Not only the fact that we have 6 very talented employees here from RVCC. The students were given foundations through the program, not only in conventional machining, some CNC machining, and also some Mastercam training. That is my expertise, is the tool making and the Mastercam. George's expertise is basically in all in manufacturing. And we feel that confident when we were able to bring in an apprentice from RVCC because of the experience level that they're getting. Don't get me wrong, it's not that we're going to get them and put them directly in on a machining center that we, $500,000 machining center and start making parts for an aircraft. They have to be trained. And we take them and we further their training. We give them an all-around training. As we say, when you work aerospace and military, there's no second chance. There's no, oh, it's okay. If it's okay, it's got to go in scrap. But with their training, then we added to the fact that we do the mentoring of these 6 individuals, in which we personally tried to guide them through their way of being in the trade. And we feel it's important because we feel that all students should know that, what their earning potentials are in this field. As I and George will both tell you, we've never been unemployed. So if you think from 1980 till right now, to not be unemployed, even in the downturns in the market, and during COVID and everything, Triad only shut down for 2 weeks. We maintain business and all. We took these employees and we took 3 of them, and we employed, and we had also had 3 of our existing employees sponsored through RVCC. We ran classes here at Triad My class was to teach them MasterCam so that they would get a foundation in CAD CAM systems and how to basically start a project, program a project. And actually they were in George's class taught to set up and machine the project. We feel that this is the best way to go to get our employees trained to the highest level possible in the field and secure their futures in this field. That's our main thing, is securing these futures. Yes, you know, we are in that gray area on that sheet of retirees. But we want to ensure that these young men and women and whoever have a future. You know, our legacy will be that we were able to hand off a future to these individuals. And working with RVCC, we feel very comfortable with that.
Yeah, just, I mean, since the beginning, being before we were even on the advisory board and just working loosely with RVCC, it's been a really good experience. Seeing what they were attempting to do, what they were doing at that time, and now seeing where it's morphed to, where it's become. The program has grown over the years in leaps and bounds. Their facility, the program itself, what the students are learning, how prepared they are to come into the industry. Like Fred said, yeah, they get the foundation, and then it's really the requirement or the responsibility of the business that's hiring them or bringing them in to now move their education, just like any other industry, trade, profession. When the students were in school, we hired them part-time to work both here and also go to the school. And we worked with the college with our schedule to be able to get them in. So they had on-the-job training and that support from the college to learn the college part of it, the technical part of it. That worked out real well. And like Conrad said, after they got through the program, all 6 of those students were hired as full-time employees, and they're still hired as full-time employees. Some of those students have now moved to programming with Fred, so they're moving in different areas of here. Some of them are what we consider setup guys that are setting up very responsible equipment, very responsible parts for the aerospace industry. So that's all worked. It's worked out very well, and I can't emphasize enough the way the program is and the cooperation between the program and us has worked out well. The other part of it that I think
You want to comment? You want to handle it?
okay, who do we?
Okay, we're going to hand off to Conrad now.
Yeah, because you guys will talk. You guys will go on for the entire day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we can speak about it the entire day. We love our
It's a
field.
passion.
We love training young minds.
I want to save some time for you to answer questions if there are any. And I just quickly want to talk about the on and off ramps, because I think it's important. We have returning students for RVCC additional training skills. We have high school or early college experience that goes into these programs, and they get the RVCC Advanced Manufacturing NIM certificate pathway. You earn those credentials, and those can be applied for credits for the MET AS degree, which is the Mechanical Engineering Technical degree, which is in its final stage for us in development at RVCC. With that AS degree, you can go off into even at or before an apprenticeship, machine level 1, to companies like Triad, or your next option is an articulation with NGIT, which gives you the opportunity of your bachelor. We find that this type of partnership is exactly what the industry needs. You have many options, and you can do it simultaneously. As Fred and George talked about, you actually have the opportunity to work while you're completing your studies and getting your credentials and certificates, and even going further into getting your bachelor's. Thank you, George. Thank you, Fred. Awesome partnership. I appreciate it.
Are we still on?
Yes. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, real quickly, just to build on what Conrad said, one of their students, one of our employees that it's not that we forget her, but we had a young woman, Gabby Sudak, was a student of RVCC. She worked here for a while, and she still does work here part-time, and she's actually a student at NJIT currently. She's in her junior year of NJIT, so it's been a great experience for her and a great experience for us to see her go through this whole thing. So
Daniel is a student of RVCC's mechanical engineering.
there's so many places to go.
That's actually a wonderful example, which actually leads to a question that we have for you both, Fred and George. So to ensure that we have a skilled manufacturing workforce, we need more companies like Triad to be involved in this work. What recommendations do you have for all of us about how to encourage and support programs like this and partnerships like this?
Well, we need to get the companies interested in training taking these students that have a foundation and wanting to train them further. Back in my apprenticeship days, the company was responsible for getting you to a certain level. In order to be able to call yourself a toolmaker 1, 2, or 3, machinist 1, 2, or 3, the company has to be held responsible. At Triad, we are responsible for training our employees. You know, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you don't have a weak link, you're strong. Triad is a strong company because we feel we don't have any weak links. We train our individuals to be highly skilled, qualified people. And that's what every company's got to want to be. They got to want to have these students excited about what they're doing. We try to excite them. You got to challenge them. You got to tell them what they're making. You're making a part for an aircraft. Remember who's counting on that aircraft.
Personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility.
It's outstanding. That's informative and inspiring for many of us, because you're exactly right. Understanding what the end user and how it impacts everybody's daily lives. That was a great analogy. No, you wanted to make a point.
Well, yes, yeah. I think a part of this too is what someone touched on. I apologize for not remembering names. So also Conrad, getting these young potential employees involved in this in high school is super important. When they're in that decision-making time, when they're trying to decide what to do with themselves. We have also brought in potential students, high school students here on tours of Triad to see these things, to explain the responsibility and what this trade brings to them, and that it is a whole new world. It's not an old smoky shop that you see in these old movies. It's very high tech. It's very computer supported. It's very clean. It's climate controlled. It's a wonderful place to work. So I think that's a very important.
Very important for this country to have a good, skilled manufacturing foundation. This is not just work in production, pushing a button. You have to be educated. You have to understand it's an honorable business. Back in the days, early days of tool making after World War II and all that, tool makers went to work in button-down shirts and ties. You were considered a very important person in society. And today, we feel that these guys are. We feel that we are. We feel that this is the way the trade has to be viewed. We feel by training kids that don't want to go to college to be in this field, that there's a future. You have a home. You can put kids through college. You can have a wonderful life, provided you're responsible for your actions.
Well said, and I think those are guiding principles for all of us. So I received that. Wonderful program, Conrad. For Raritan Valley, I mean, you all have done a wonderful program. How did Raritan Valley engage with Triad for this partnership, and are you looking to expand this program?
So we have a large group of employers. Employers that come to us, finding us, finding what we have to provide, and so on. For Triad, they were close to us. That was good. They also heard and know about the college, and I was invited there to see their production. And when I saw what they did and how passionate they were, we invited them to be on our advisory board. We're looking for members of the advisory board that helps to guide the program, and they've just been excellent. We are looking for more partners like this. I like to say that I perfected the Triad partnership, and now we can export it.
Conrad's
Wonderful.
done an outstanding job with us.
Proof is in the deliverables of your employees who are there with you. A question from one of the attendees around your trainees, and what are they typically compensated at when they come into the program?
Well, we'll go by one of our individuals who's in one of those frames that you've seen. Is a very young man. He was started here when he was 20 years old. At the time he was going to classes there, we started him at around $17 an hour. You have to pay him, you know, but 1 year later, that young man's compensation was increased at more than $22 an hour. When you see talent and you train and everything, you got to pay them. And Triad's a big positive thing is to train. Once you're trained, we'll pay you. They're making you money. You gotta help them out.
Their training is much like a college degree, to compare it. So their training is hung on the wall like a degree, and it's shown in their actions, the same as anyone that goes to college. And that's how they have to all be looked at. That's how we were looked at throughout our years in trade. I've been working for this company. It'll be 40 years in October. It's been a very good ride.
Some of the other key takeaways I hear from Fred and George, you all have made a deliberate, or Triad Tool has made a deliberate intent on its investment in your employees. You see the value of training and retention of employees, and you mentioned the fact that the company had minimum disruption even during the pandemic. I think that speaks volumes to the type of environment you've created there, and I have to commend you both and Triad Tool on the work you've done, and being one of our manufacturers here in New Jersey, and Raritan Valley for the partnership that they have. Thank you all for sharing this partnership today. And thank you everyone for joining us and for your questions. If you have additional questions, please feel free to let us know. This is a wonderful first example of partnerships that our community colleges have with our industry across the state. And I think it's a model, as Conrad mentioned, that can certainly be expanded and replicated. So we hope to see that and play a role in that. And thank you again for taking time today out of your schedule to be with us. At this time, I'd like to
thank you.
Thank you, and like to pass it back to Catherine for closing out our program.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to our partners at Triad and Raritan Valley Community College. Thank you. Next, we're going to have some remarks from Aaron Fichtner, president of the New Jersey Council of County Colleges. This initiative, this Pathways initiative, really was his vision, and he's going to impart some wisdom on us this morning. Aaron?
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that introduction, even if it was inaccurate. But it is great to be with all of you all over New Jersey again for this really important discussion. I hope that you all got incredible value from the great presentation from Kyle and Jason. And again, we thank Focus New Jersey and the Department of Labor and Workforce Development for great partners. And just want to congratulate Conrad and his team at Raritan Valley and the folks at Triad for coming up with a great and really innovative model that honors education and training, gets individuals on a path to good paying jobs to propel our manufacturers, and I think all inspire us to continue to find new ways to build the on-ramps and off-ramps that Conrad mentioned. So like we said, this is our first collaborative meeting, and we hope that all of you will join with us in this effort. We are again committed aggressively to really understanding and communicating the changing landscape and workforce needs of this really important industry, sharing that with all of you, and then to highlight those best practices and promising practices and to encourage collaboration. And so I would say in my remarks, which I will keep short because it's Friday and I'm sure people have other more exciting things to do at the end of a long week. But I just would encourage all of us to embrace some of these innovative and promising practices, to think very differently about how we partner and work together. We really need to break down the barriers that have held us back as a state, whether it's the barriers that have artificially kept us from collaborating at the level that we want to collaborate between high schools and community colleges and four-year colleges, whether it's really rethinking at the level of the folks at Triad, how we bring business into this collaborative effort. So it's a shared effort and enterprise. So I would say, now is the time. And I ask all of you to join with us in this effort and keep pushing all of us to collaborate and to work to build this ecosystem. I know, and we all know that if we are going to have the most skilled and trained, innovative, entrepreneurial manufacturing and supply chain management workforce in the country and the world, which I would say we need to have if we're going to protect our economic future here in New Jersey, we need to work together in very, very different ways and embrace innovative models. And so we are excited that our two centers of workforce innovation in manufacturing and in supply chain management will be leading the charge to develop new curriculum models. And we're excited that all of you are working with us on this really important effort. So thank you to all of the incredible presenters today. Special thank you to Triad for being an employer leader and partner. Really enjoyed your presentation. Hope to be able to come out and see your facility someday and to see the model in action. So love that to happen at some point. And we really look forward to having in-person meetings of this collaborative where we can roll up our sleeves and network and collaborate in ways that are not always so possible on Zoom. So thank you to our team, Glenn and John, Catherine and others, Lauren, for putting together today's meeting. And we look forward to many more monthly meetings as we build that skilled workforce here in New Jersey. We can do this and we can do it together. Thank you, and back to Catherine.
Thank you, Aaron. Just want to echo what you said about how much we appreciate everyone's participation. And I wanted to make sure, in fact, that you all knew you could connect with us by getting involved, signing up on our website. You can hold your phone over this QR code to be directed to the sign up page to make sure that you receive all future meeting invitations and updates from us. Also wanted to make you all aware of next month's collaborative meeting dates. Today concludes all of our collaborative meetings for February, and we're starting this all over again, and we'll have a robust agenda for you all and opportunities for you all to participate. We are dropping a link to a survey in the chat right now. Please fill out that survey. In addition to feedback about this meeting, we are interested in whatever innovative pathways, partnerships that you all have so that we can give you the opportunity to present before this group. We know that we are all busy doing things in our silos, but we can all benefit collectively if we know what's happening out there and perhaps leverage and capitalize on those relationships, those programs, those partnerships. This whole partnership initiative is about accomplishing more together. And we think we can do that. And we want to highlight you and what your institution and organizations are doing. So again, thank you all for being here and enjoy your weekend.